Sorry?
It's okay when you...
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so let me start. It's been a long day, so I'm going to keep it short and try to make it as productive for you as possible. My name is Gluchowski. I work with Ethereum Foundation and Matter Labs on Ethereum scaling with zero-knowledge proofs. So I want to start with a motivation for this, or with a question why it matters, or does it matter actually? How many of you work with solutions which require scaling today? Oh, interesting, quite a few. So there are a lot of opinions that scaling actually doesn't matter now, and they need to focus on usability and user adoption. So like, do we really need to think about it now, or maybe we can do it later as the adoption grows? My answer to this is, well, the moment you hit the adoption, you hit the scalability wall, it's going to be too late, because you're going to lose the momentum, and your competitors who were thinking about scalability in the beginning are going to take over. So, and maybe you will just break the entire network. So it matters, and you want to plan for the successful case. If things remain like this today, that scaling is not really required, it's probably not going to make anybody happy. So if you believe that your project will succeed, then you have to scale and you have to plan ahead of time. Yeah, but other things are also important. It's important to be able to develop stuff quickly. It's important to have good UX, and scalability, security, and decentralization, which is the famous blockchain trilemma, also matter a lot. So you want your scaling solution to embrace them from the beginning. And there are multiple scaling approaches available for blockchains today. Well, the most trivial one is centralization, or just limiting the number of nodes to the bare minimum, which is, of course, a joke. You have sharding, you have payment, state channels, you have plasma. All of them have merits, and they have upsides, downsides, but mostly these solutions have problems with one of the edges of the blockchain trilemma. So they reduce either scalability, or I mean, sorry, they either reduce the security of the network, or they reduce the decentralization. So I'm going to talk about the method which keeps all three parameters at high level. This is zero-knowledge proofs. How many of you are familiar with zero-knowledge proofs? Oh, wow, that's impressive, like almost everybody. So I don't need to dive much deep into this. Zero-knowledge proofs allow us to prove that some computation is correct without revealing all the input data for this computation. But what's interesting for us for scaling is succinctness. Some zero-knowledge approaches have succinctness, which means that the amount of computation I can do and I can prove is much larger than the proof size and the amount of computations I need to do in order to verify them. But today, currently only two methods support this. These are Starks and Snarks. I'm going to talk about them a bit further. So how can we apply zero-knowledge proofs to scaling? On the project I'm working on now, we have a zero-knowledge proofs-based sidechain where we have some blocks on the main chain. So the notion of sidechain is clear, right? We have main chain going on, and then we have a sidechain, and each block gets committed on the main chain. We have some cryptographic commitments. Normally it's Merkle root. We just have a notarized version of this block so that it matches the security of the main chain. However, we also need to secure the sidechain somehow, and for this we use zero-knowledge proofs. So in our approach, we have a account-based model where the entire state of the sidechain is represented as a Merkle tree with some accounts at the leaves of the tree. We have the Merkle root representing the entire state, and we commit the state. Now, on each step, when we progress to a new block, we provide a proof that the transition was correct. That means that every transaction which was included in the new block and which affects the state has followed the rules of the sidechain. So we verify the signature of the transaction, we verify that the sender had valid balance, that the receiver had was also valid, and so on. And then in the state, the balance was updated correctly. We subtracted the right amount and added the same amount to the recipient. And we submit a proof on the main chain, which is verified by smart contract. In our case, it's Ethereum. So this approach has a few challenges. One challenge is that zero-knowledge generation, snarks or Stark, doesn't matter, is relatively slow at the moment. So depending on the hardware we use, it takes somewhere between 1 and 20 minutes. So instant confirmations or instant final confirmations, instant finality is not possible out of box. We need to go some workarounds for this. But how do we achieve throughput? If every block has some limited capacity, and if we would have to wait 20 minutes till the next block, we would not be able to fit too many transactions in this. So what we do with Rollup is we introduce a pipeline. So we make commitments and verifications in parallel. We commit every new block on the main chain, and then we just go on and commit new blocks, and the verification follows after some delay. We call this latency. This allows us to increase the throughput to actually practically boundless. We are only limited by the hardware we require to run the proof. The second big problem is data availability. So the zero-knowledge proofs approach is solving completely the fraud problem. The operators can never cheat. Unlike Plasma and state channels, there is no way for the operator to commit any incorrect and inconsistent data, because it always has to be followed by the proof. However, the data itself must be made publicly available to the users of this blockchain. Otherwise, an operator can commit a correct proof, but never disclose the data, and then the funds become unrecoverable, because nobody else can go and prove that in the new block they had some stake in specific account. So we solve this. So this is actually what Rollup stands for. We put the data on chain as a transaction call. So we do not use Ethereum storage. We simply use Ethereum for making the data publicly available, and we rely on the mining mechanism and on the game theoretical properties of Ethereum that this data will be just distributed broadly and people will be able to collect it, and thus every new state will be reflected so you can reconstruct it. And currently it takes, for the simple token transfer, only 9 bytes. So 9 bytes is like 500 gas, which is very small, much smaller compared to normal transfers, and especially to token transfers. However, this limits us on the throughput. So with this approach, we can post maximum 500 transactions per second in Ethereum with the current characteristics. There is work on the way. Maybe some things will change in Ethereum protocol. Maybe some pricing will change. There are other approaches to solve data availability differently, but this is state of the art, what we can achieve right now. Now, let's compare the scaling approach, the different scaling techniques between each other. So we have state payment channels like Lightning and Raiden. We have Plasma. We have zero-knowledge rollup. Well, Lightning and Plasma are actually not limited by throughput, essentially anything but the capital requirements or the liveness assumption. So liveness means that in order for you to use payment channels or Plasma or state channels, users have to be online. If you submit a transaction, you have to wait for, you have to constantly monitor the chain as long as your funds are in the side chain and see whether there are fraud attempts, and you have to counter them. So you have to submit a counter transaction in order to prevent fraud. And this is called liveness. And this is a big problem because it introduces UX trade-offs, and it also introduces security risks, since if you were not on time to prevent fraud, or if you were not successful to submit this transaction on chain, then you're gonna lose the funds, right? So zero knowledge proofs completely eliminate this. With zero knowledge, we are liveness free. As soon as you submitted the transaction and it got mined and it got confirmed by zero knowledge proofs, you're safe. You have the same security guarantees as the main chain. So yeah, on the throughput for Lightning, for payment channels, because it's happening off-chain, you could do any throughput, whatever. However, in reality, you are bounded by, you're limited by the capital which is put in the channel. So if you open a channel for 1 Ether and then you get 10 transactions and you reach the limit, you have to reopen the channel and increase it. So it's difficult to measure or to quantify it here, but it's going to be practically very limited. With Plasma, we don't have this problem. With Plasma, some Plasma constructs are pretty efficient and they allow like very high transaction throughputs under the liveness assumption. And also they would require users to download very large amount of data to monitor for frauds. So, but we can say that it's very high at slightly worse capital efficiency than the zero knowledge proofs. The capital efficiency is the amount of capital you need to park, which is going to remain idle in order for you to operate the chain. So with Lightning, of course, it's norm. It's going to be very large. With Plasma, we only have some difficulties with certain models like Plasma Cash, because Plasma will support Plasma Cash and similar constructs support non-fungible tokens. If you want to represent fungible assets, you have to make changes, and this introduces some small capital requirement. With zero knowledge proofs, on the other hand, you don't have any extra capital requirement at all. It's a complete transparent chain where all the money you put in are going to remain there. You don't need this 1 cent extra. So these are the approaches you can compare depending on the application, on the use case. Different things are going to be better suited. We believe that zero knowledge are going to be the future for secure chains. So if you need high security, it's going to be the best mix of UX, cost, and throughput. And throughput, actually, it looks small. However, if we compare it to, let's say, PayPal, I mean, till we reach this limit, it's going to be a good problem to solve by then. So I mentioned before, we have 2 different kinds of zero knowledge proof techniques which can be used for scaling. Snarks and Starks. Both because of the S of succinct part in it. So we have succinct non-interactive proofs, succinct transparent proofs, arguments of knowledge. They are mostly, from the user perspective, they are the same. You don't really, like from user perspective, what matters is the cost and proving time and the verification cost, but you can deal with them as a black box. Under the hood, they differ significantly in characteristics. So Starks are polylogarithmic, and the prover is n-polylogarithmic, which is the prover complexity is comparable. It's taken approximately the same amount of time or amount of resources to compute Snarks and Starks proof. However, the verification, because of the proof size, favors Snarks way more for the public blockchains. Because in public blockchains we have the gas limit or otherwise limiting the bandwidth of the network. It's really very hard to beat 300 bytes. With Starks we're going to have 100 kilobytes. If the price of inputs is going to go down in Ethereum, maybe it will be more or less efficient, but Snarks will always remain better. So why don't we use Snarks right now? Why has nobody done yet any solution which is in production for scaling? I mean, of course, we have Snarks in Zcash, but not for scaling yet. The reason for this is the trusted setup. So this is the ugly part of Snarks, or has been so far. We need to create some predefined data, which we call common reference string, which the participants or the people who create this data have to use some external entropy, and then they have to delete this entropy and forget it. And there is no way to prove that they have actually forgotten it. That's why if one person creates the trusted setup, it's going to be very difficult to trust it, right? The trust assumption is going to defeat the very purpose of the public blockchains. That's why we have something like MPC, multi-party computation ceremony, similar to what Zcash did with first Sprout and then Sapling, where N participants compute the trusted setup, and if at least one of them is honest and deleted this initial entropy, which we refer to as a toxic waste, then the entire ceremony is safe. It's enough to have just one honest participant. In other words, in order to compromise the ceremony, all of them together have to collude and join the data and then use it to generate fake proofs. Which, if we have a lot of high-profile, respected, credible participants, it's going to be, I think it's going to be very convincing that they cannot do this, but we can't. At the moment, the snark techniques which we have, the most efficient one being Growth 16, requires the trusted setup to be done for every application, for every specific circuit, and for every update of this application. So whenever we do just one small change, we have to rerun the entire trusted setup, and we have to go in this multi-party ceremony, and every participant has to secure their data, and it's getting very complicated and very costly. So this is why snarks have not reached wide adoption yet. However, we have a new hope on the horizon. It's called Sonic. It's a construct by Sean Ball from Zcash. He announced that at the beginning of this month, and there is already implementation on the way by Zcash and by Matter Labs. Matter Labs is going to be faster probably. And the special thing about Sonic is that it still requires a trusted setup, but this trusted setup is universal. We do it once, and we can use it for all applications, and for every update, we just reuse the data which was produced by this initial trusted setup. And it's also updatable. So if you have your application and you want to use Sonic trusted setup produced by a group of highly trusted participants, but you still don't trust them, you can always take it and add your entropy on top, and then you're going to be 100% sure that there was no backdoor and no compromise. So from practical standpoint, this completely solves the problem. I mean, there's going to be people who never trust the setup because they are trusted, but if we have significantly trusted or significantly credible respected participants, it's probably not going to be a problem. Yeah, so that's it for now. You can follow the developments on Twitter, on my account. We're going to have some interesting news. Probably this year, there are going to be some more protocols coming out, which are even more efficient. And we're going to see some implementations for this on Ethereum. So yeah, thank you for your attention. Charles?
Can you go back to the slide with the logarithmic and the constant? Yeah, this one. So my understanding is that snarks are considered to have a constant verifier complexity because of the initialization parameters. Essentially, they bound you in some way. So couldn't you also consider this with Starks, that if you say that the n is like up to a certain size, theoretically you're still like O of 1 with just a huge constant?
Well, you're still not going to be O of 1. It's still going to grow logarithmically. But
what I'm saying is that you pick your initialization parameters such that you never exceed this number, which makes your complexity constant. You put an upper bound, like which is constant, based on the limitations you put. Because in snarks, the computational complexity that you can prove, it's bound by the ceremony that you do. Is that correct?
This is correct. So we go to some maximum amount of circuit. So
Yes.
if we have the same with Starks, we will have also. Well, yes, you can say it's like it will be practically O of 1, but with very large C.
Yes.
The constant is going to be extremely large, and what matters here is the practical implementation, the practical cost on the blockchain. So for now, the verification of snarks costs about 600,000 gas. If it's just one snark, if we batch multiple snarks together, it's going to be much cheaper. Each additional marginal cost of each additional snark is around 150k gas. With Starks, it's going to be in the order of magnitude of several million gas for the very low. Like if we go for the same circuit size, which is not strictly comparable between Starks and Starks, but if we like let's say we go for the same amount of computations, it's going to be much more, even with polylogarithmic asymptotic values.
Okay.
No more questions? Peter?
So what about the next step about Sonics into the
The next steps about Sonic. So as I mentioned, there are two implementations to the best of my knowledge which are going on right now for Sonics. One by Zcash, another one by MetaLabs. I think MetaLabs is going to be faster because Zcash focuses on different things, but I mean, it's up to them. And we, oh, right, you're absolutely right. We need some things to change in Ethereum in order for us to be able to use Sonics. We need different precompiles for different elliptic curves. And we expect this to happen hopefully by the next hard fork, which is scheduled for August. We'll see. We were working closely with guys who are responsible for the hard fork. From then on, once the implementation of the prover and the precompiles are done, we can immediately use Sonic for production in Ethereum. Then the only thing missing will be the actual trusted setup ceremony with a large number of credible participants.
Well, I guess you have started the project before the attack on Snaps. Well, the attack that was released on the Sprout protocol, the Pinocchio, basically. So you had to update your trusted setup as well, and to make it compatible with the Ghost 16, because otherwise anyone can fake proofs.
So what happened in Sprout? It was not an attack, and it was not even an exploit. It was a problem in the it was a mistake in the software implementation that made it possible for people who would know about this mistake to use the public transcript and to produce fake proofs. Yeah. Now we don't know whether this happened or not. Probably not, but it was just a mistake in the implementation.
Yeah, because basically there was no proof of model. The proof of security was the one of Pinocchio, but then Zcash, they changed this. They changed typically the pairings for type.
Yeah, they moved to a different proof system. They moved from Pinocchio to Growth 16. And after that, and they deleted the entire transcript so that nobody can reuse it. And then they made some undercover story about this and so on. And they pissed Peter Todd. But why this happened, let's take a systematic approach. Why this actually happened in the beginning, I believe that the fundamental problem was that the trusted setup of Sprout was did not get as much public attention because it was specific to just this one project, which would only benefit the Zcash stakeholders. So it was not enough incentive for people in the broader cryptographic community to go and audit it strictly and check the the code and the specification and make sure that all the parameters were correct. Simply because the incentives were missing. Now with Sonic, this is going to be different. Because Sonic will be, everybody will be able to reuse it. Ethereum will be able to do so, other blockchains, enterprise applications, and so on and so on. It's much more interesting. We expect the participants in the Sonic Trusted setup to be much more high profile and to be much more diverse, broadly represented by different communities. And correspondingly, also the attention to detail and peer review and audit is going to be much higher level.
And by the way, there was a paper pushed by Groth, which has a common reference string updatable as well, so universal before the Sonic. So why there is much more attention to Sonic paper?
Oh, all other constructs which were before Sonic were not efficient.
Okay.
I should have mentioned that Sonic shares the asymptotic characteristics of snarks. That is the breakthrough of Sonic. All the other things before were not usable just because they were too expensive.
Hello? Yeah, sorry.
So it was a mistake, not in the protocol itself, but in the paper, yes, and they just implemented the code with a mistake. Well, the code was implemented according to the specification, which was incorrect. Yes.
So I just have one remark. I remember last time when Eli Ben Sasson from Star Core team at DEF CON, he presented, and he said that Stark's, the prover complexity is quasi-linear and not polylogarithmic. So I'm just wondering if that changed since then.
No, it is quasi-linear. It's n, polylog n. So it grows with the number of operations you have to perform almost linearly, slightly more than linearly. Just like with snarks. Snarks are slightly more efficient, but it doesn't matter because the proofs are they are a little slow now. So it will take between 1 and 20 minutes, on average maybe 5 minutes with good hardware. But we expect also new hardware to appear, and we expect also to use GPUs and other optimizations and eventually ASICs for this. So they're going to go to negligibly low levels. So it won't matter. It will be very close to the native computation of of whatever you're trying to prove.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think it's done. Thank you very much.